All right. Hey, happy Monday, everybody. I am almost 100% sure I'm live. I got to make sure I'm not going to get any feedback. There it is. I will fix it. All right, there we go. All better. It's really complicated when I'm trying to say one thing, but I'm hearing myself in a 10-second delay in the other ear. It's not going to work out well for any of us. So, welcome back to another Parents Helping Parents Live. It's first Monday in June. The year seems like it's absolutely flying by. I hope that everybody has been well. If you're joining us for the first time, or maybe you're catching this through somebody else's feed and you're not familiar with Parents Helping Parents, I'll tell you a little bit about our organization for a few minutes. Parents Helping Parents is an Oklahoma-based nonprofit organization founded by parents, primarily run by parents, with the mission of providing education, resources, and shared experiences to parents who have a child any age who may be struggling with a substance use disorder, addiction, or alcoholism. Basically, what we do is we support those parents in any way that they might need. We connect them to local resources, counseling centers, treatment centers, support groups. We want to share some of our own experiences. A lot of our parents who are involved in the support groups, they've been down this road. They've had young people who have struggled with addiction for a long time. Some of them have young people who have found recovery. We've got parents who have had young people who have paid the price to addiction and lost their lives. And really what we want to do is we want to share our stories. We want to share our experiences and maybe provide people with some hope for some change. And then we want to, educate. Oh yeah, and then provide some education. Addiction is one of those fundamental things that's really misunderstood. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit, but we want to provide education and help people along the way to learn about addiction, to learn about recovery. So if you're watching, we're really happy you're here. Maybe you've got young children in middle school and high school who are struggling with addiction, maybe just starting to experiment with drugs or alcohol. You're in the right spot. We want to offer you support. Maybe you're a middle-aged adult who has an adult child who's been in and out of recovery or struggled with alcohol or drug use for a long time. We want to support you as well. You guys are all in the right spot. So for more information about what we do, all the wonderful ways that we support people, all the different online and in-person support groups and meetings that we have, you can check us out on Facebook at Parents Helping Parents, Inc. Is a great way to connect to us and stay informed. And also you can check out our website, parentshelpingparents.info. So before we get started, I'm actually going to do it as we speak. I want people who are watching to do me a favor and reach up and click the share button. That is a very inexpensive and very cheap way for you to help our mission, right? By clicking share, you're exponentially increasing the amount of people that we can reach. And we want to make this video available to as many people as possible, because this very video might be the thing that provides somebody hope. It might be the thing that helps create a breakthrough for change for somebody. And we want as many people to see that as possible. So you guys share it. I'm going to share it. If I can figure out how to do that. Here we go. Share now public. Great. We're all on board. I'm going to ask you to do that a couple of more times. You know, we want tonight's discussion to be actually as much of a discussion as we can. We want this to be interactive. There's a couple of different ways to do that. There's a couple of different ways to participate and ask questions, even though this is a just kind of a live singular Zoom event. One of those is, if you're watching live on Facebook, you can comment on the video. Comments are welcome, questions are welcome. I'm monitoring that in one corner of my screen, so I should see all of that come up in a timely manner and be able to address any questions or comments that come up that way. Remember, if you're commenting on Facebook, that this is the internet. That's going to be on there forever, permanently tied to the video. A lot of our Parents Helping Parents family and a lot of the families that engage with us are a little bit concerned about their privacy and their anonymity. Maybe if they're at a place in their own story where they're not quite comfortable sharing what's going on in their family, and we want to respect that. So there is also a private way that you can interact and ask questions. In the title of this video on Facebook, there is a text line. That is a Google text specifically for this Parents Helping Parents live event. That text goes to the Google chat that I've got opened up. Name's not attached to it. You don't have to attach any identifying information. Ask your question, give your comments, and I will address those anonymously so that we can protect everybody's privacy. So I'm actually kind of a little bit excited about tonight. I get the privilege of hosting this live stream for Parents Helping Parents twice a month. But since I've been hosting the live stream, I don't get the opportunity to actually speak at any of the Parents Helping Parents groups very often like I used to. I used to do it several times a year for some of the multiple groups that we have going on. And now I get to bring in a lot of great speakers, but I really missed getting to share some of kind of what's been on my mind and what's been on my heart related to families and related to addiction. So I thought, what better time to do that than the beginning of the summer? Lots of people are out vacationing and busy, so I wanted to take an opportunity to maybe just present some of my own thoughts about what might be going on in the world of addiction, in the world of treatment, in the world of recovery. So for those of you who are used to seeing me interact with people but don't know much about me, I do have a particular area of expertise here. I've been a mental health therapist and addiction counselor for going on 17 years now. I've had the privilege of working in a variety of different settings. I've done some outpatient work with adolescents and families, and I've done some residential treatment work with adolescents and family. And currently I'm a clinician and on the counseling team at Country Road Recovery, a 90-day residential drug and alcohol treatment center for adult men and women. And so I would like to think that over the years I've learned a little bit. I actually had a really wonderful compliment the other day when I was leading group with some people. One of the new guys, about halfway through the groups, kind of looked up from the back of the room and he said, "Oh man, you really know what you're talking about." And I thought, well, I hope that if you're coming into treatment and coming into group therapy, that you want the leader to know what they're talking about. And that wasn't quite his expectation, but he was shocked at and maybe the wealth of experience to the conversation that we were able to have. So I also recently had the opportunity to present to some other professionals, which I love doing, about this very topic. And the thing that we were talking about is beginning to piece together how we understand addiction and how the way in which we understand addiction relates to the way in which we understand recovery. Recovery has been this kind of mystical term that people talk about all the time, but sometimes we have a hard time defining. And for families or for people who have struggled with alcohol and drugs who have never stepped in to a recovery program or have never been around people in recovery, it can be really confusing. And the language can be confusing, and how we speak about recovery can be confusing. And so I think it's important to maybe take a step back and help people understand what recovery is, what a program of recovery is, and how programs of recovery ultimately are designed to help us create deep and meaningful change in our life. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I've actually got some slides that have some information on them that I'm going to share as I talk. So I'm going to do a quick screen share of this PowerPoint presentation. So you should see the PowerPoint presentation for your main screen. You should see my face in the small screen. If that's not the case, somebody send me a message and let me know that everything is all messed up. So as we're getting started, just another reminder, click the share button, share the video. You never know who might be watching, and there are plenty of people who don't understand addiction and who don't understand treatment and recovery, and we want to make sure that we help all those people out. So with that being said, you'll see the first slide on the screen here, which just says that how we understand recovery is going to be connected to how we understand addiction. That seems kind of like a no-brainer comment, but you would be surprised how many people maybe struggle with this concept and don't understand it. The reason that they don't understand much about recovery or much about what recovery does is because they are starting from a bad spot. They're starting from a spot where they actually don't understand addiction either. And so in order to begin our conversation, we actually have to talk a little bit about addiction and what addiction is, and kind of frame up some conceptualizations there before we can move on. So I'm also scrolling to the top of my notes here. Here we go. Here's why this is important. For a long time, addiction was seen as some sort of moral failing, some sort of thing in which somebody was a bad person, something was wrong with them, and because they had poor morality or because they weren't a good person, they got wrapped up in this alcohol or drug related issue. And if we see addiction as just some sort of simple moral failing, then what we're going to do is we're going to see recovery only in terms of moral solutions and change. And we're going to boil recovery down to just saying, oh, if somebody's doing the right things, then they're working a great program of recovery. Or if somebody's doing some moral upstanding things, or working a program of recovery because they're obviously not falling into the moral pitfalls of addiction. And so this is a real fairly archaic definition of addiction, and we don't see a lot of people defining addiction as a moral failing anymore professionally, but we do see it a lot of times still in the community. And so we want to first understand that addiction isn't just some sort of moral failing, because the solution to addiction isn't just some sort of morality. Without maybe accidentally stepping on people's toes, and I'll preface this by saying, my own religious life is powerfully important to me, but one of the pitfalls that we seem to get into with addiction is there are a lot of treatment programs and a lot of support systems who might say, hey, addiction is just some sort of moral failing, some sort of sin-related issue, and if somebody could only quote unquote, get right with God or get in a good church, then the addiction will automatically resolve itself. And I don't want to obviously take away the miraculous power of religious belief in those things, because it absolutely is a possibility. But just like with other ailments that might come up, just like with other ways that people might be sick or other ways that people might be hurting, we understand that that can be a powerful component to somebody's change. But I've never known anyone who, has had cancer diagnosis and has said, oh, God's going to heal my cancer, and then not gone to an oncologist or not gone to a medical doctor to also seek great medical care. And so while that can be an important part of change, an important part of growth, it's not the only thing that matters in a program of recovery. Recovery is much broader than just a religious experience. And so the other thing that's important is that we don't see addiction just as a behavioral choice. If we see addiction just as a behavioral choice, then we're going to think of recovery only in light of somebody's positive behavioral solutions. If somebody's acting right, then they are right and they're recovered, right? And there's no depth to that. And we certainly want to move past that as well, both professionally and in our communities. So let's see if I can get to the next slide. Here we go. I'm working like 8 different screens. That can be a problem. When we have a reductionist view of addiction, we're going to have a reductionist view of recovery. And that's the issue with not understanding addiction comprehensively. If we make addiction just about one thing or just about one piece of life, then we're not going to have a proper understanding of recovery, the depth that recovery needs, and the depth that a program of recovery needs. So let's walk through briefly like a really good working definition of addiction, and we'll see why this is more critically important. This is a little wordy, but I think it's really important. I'll read it. Addiction is a primary chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. Dysfunction in these circuits lead to characteristic biological, psychological, social, and spiritual manifestation. This is reflected in an individual's pathology, pursuing reward, and or relief by substance use and other behaviors. So we're going to take this a piece at a time because that's obviously wordy. And the first thing that we want to talk about is understanding addiction as a primary disease. That's really simple. That just means that we understand addiction as a big problem. It's not, oh, somebody has depression and addiction. If we take care of their depression, the addiction will go away. We understand addiction as a primary problem that requires treatment. It's not some sort of second sibling or second fiddle to a more severe problem. It actually is almost always a primary problem. It's also worth noting here that we call addiction primary, but we also want to think of addiction as treatable. Nobody at Parents Helping Parents would do what they do if we didn't believe addiction was treatable. I wouldn't have invested a long career in addiction treatment if I didn't think that it was a treatable disease that people can overcome with the right recovery. So we understand addiction as primary. We understand addiction as chronic. Not just chronic, but chronically progressive is probably the more accurate terminology. And that just means that without intervention, addiction will get worse. It will not stop, and it will get worse eventually ending up in what a traditional 12-step program would say, jail's institution or death, right? That addiction is not just going to miraculously go away on its own. Addiction isn't just going to get better without treatment. It's chronic, it's progressive, it's primary. The idea of a chronic disease also moves us past initial interventions and reminds us that if the disease of addiction is chronic and progressive, then a program of recovery also has to be chronic. That we don't just enter into a program of recovery, get better, and then stop that program of recovery. You wouldn't take someone to cancer treatment and then that person start feeling better after 1 or 2 cancer treatments and then think, oh, they're feeling better, problem solved, no more need for treatment. No, the disease is chronic, and so the process of recovering from the disease also has to be chronic. The treatment might not have to be chronic, in the way, treatment's a big word. Treatment can mean lots of different things, and somebody might not always be in drug or alcohol treatment, but the program of recovery that someone builds is something that eventually should become integrated into their life and becomes perpetual and long lasting, because if they stop the program of recovery, then they're eventually going to get worse again. That means that patient compliance is really important. Compliance to someone's program of recovery becomes really important. I've talked to countless people who have experienced unfortunate relapses, even after long periods of recovery, multiple years, 10 years, a decade, 20 years. And it's almost always, when I talk to them and I start to hear the experience of the relapse and hear the relapse story, it always starts with, well, I stopped, fill in the blank. If a part of their program of recovery was 12-step support groups, then it would be, oh, I stopped going to meetings. If their program of recovery had a heavy family involvement component, oh, I stopped talking to my family, or I stopped working, right? All these things. And so we understand that compliance with that program becomes really, really important. The other thing this definition highlights and points out is that addiction is a disease of the brain. There is no longer any scientific or professional argument that addiction is a disease. And for a long time, people wanted to fight against that, but the science is really clear. The professional community is really clear. This isn't even a debate anymore. A disease is simply when there's an organ of the body that experiences a defect, and because of that defect, there are symptoms of the problem. You take a broken leg, for example. Somebody breaks a femur. The organ that has the disease is the femur. The disease is the femur is broken, and the symptoms of those disease are pain and swelling and lack of range of motion. So that simple definition of disease is easily applied to addiction. And so what we want to look at is we want to look at the organ that's being impacted is the brain. The disease is addiction, and because of that, there are symptoms related to that disease. A really great way to think about this, and I think this can be really helpful in a really maybe kind of layman's terms way to understand addiction and brain chemistry, is that your brain has lots of different parts. It starts to grow inside and grows out. It also starts to grow from the back and grows forward. And so the first part of the brain to develop, scientists often call it the reptile brain or the pineal brain. It's the deep midbrain. It's the part of our brain that's responsible for survival, for the need to get food, the need to protect ourselves, the need to procreate, and all of those things. And so the last part of our brain to develop is our frontal cortex and our prefrontal cortex, which is primarily responsible for our decision making. We laugh all the time and we think all the time about how young people make poor decisions, and we maybe give teenagers a hard time, or even young 20-somethings a hard time about their decision making skills. And it's actually science. They're supposed to be bad at making choices because the last part of the brain to develop is the part of your brain that helps you think through the decision making process, and that really doesn't finish growing until the mid to late 20s, is what science is now telling us. And so as these two parts of my brain begin to interact, especially in my adulthood, what happens is my midbrain fires up and wants to do something crazy and primal. I love thinking about the example if I'm going through a shopping center, I'm putting groceries into my car, and I come around the corner and somebody else rams into my cart, and we kind of stutter up, and I look up at this person, I apologize, I say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I ran into my cart into you," and this person looks at me and just reads me my rights. Good, blankety blank blank blank. My midbrain is going to fire up, and it's going to tell me to do something like choke this person, right? We've all had experience where like, I kind of just want to choke this person. So my midbrain tells me to do that, but then my prefrontal cortex, my frontal lobe, immediately steps in and says, "Hey, Derek, that's probably a bad idea. You don't want to be choking people in the supermarket. Your 15-year-olds with you, and that'd be a terrible example for them. You've got a professional license, and you don't really want to get arrested and all these things." And so then my midbrain says, "Okay, you're right, prefrontal cortex. I'm not going to do anything. I apologize," and I go on about my way, right? As the process of addiction begins to set in and my brain becomes hijacked, we actually call it the hijacked brain in treatment centers. What begins to happen is something happens and my prefrontal cortex fires up and it says, "You should do this." And then, or my midbrain fires up and says, "You should do this." My prefrontal cortex says, "Hey, no, this is probably a bad idea." But then my midbrain recaptures the process and says, "No, you should definitely do that. You should definitely choke somebody," and then we make that mistake. And so the primal part of my brain actually reprioritizes chemical use, it reprioritizes drugs and alcohol and whatever I have to do to get drugs and alcohol over things that normally under normal circumstances I would make the right decision. This becomes really important. We see all kinds of horrific documentaries about addiction, people who are experiencing painful stories, and one of the things that we see is maybe mothers who don't buy diapers or don't buy food for their children because they're spending those money on opiates or on cocaine or whatever it might be. And we see that in my humanness, I want to look at that and I want to say, man, how could any mother in their right mind choose opiates, cocaine, heroin over their child? And what I have to remember is because of this brain disease, because of this hijacked brain, no mother in their right mind would choose that. This is a mother who's operating with a diseased brain that has reprioritized chemicals over the needs of her own child. And so that mother isn't in their right minds. That mother's operating with a hijacked brain. The disease of addiction, and it's powerful and it requires treatment to overcome, right? So that's kind of this basic definition of addiction. It's a progressive, chronic, primary disease of my brain that requires intervention and treatment to correct, to get better, and over the lifetime of the person in recovery requires you to continue to engage that recovery process. This is where a lot of times we stop with this definition, and this is where we begin, if we stop just here, to have a reductionist view of what might be going on. And so we actually have to move on from understanding this disease of the brain to the second half of this definition, where we talk about characteristic manifestations. And so I want to be clear that it's important that we know that addiction is progressive and chronic and primary, but it's also critically important that we understand that these characteristic manifestations are a big part of understanding what addiction does, how addiction impacts me, and then how I build a program of recovery to correct those things. Having this reductionist view of addiction and making it just about the primary, the chronicness, even having a reductionist view of addiction where we make it just about somebody's chemical use actually means that we reduce recovery to just being about chemical use. And we don't want it to be just about chemical use, but hear me correctly, right? I think being chemical free and being sober is an important part of the recovery process. Obviously, the initial goal is for somebody to be sober and free of chemicals. And I think that that's important. But if that's the only goal of recovery, then that is selling way short the potential that recovery has to change somebody's lives, because just being chemical free is oftentimes not going to work for someone. Being chemical free, but still being an emotional train wreck, being chemical free, but still not understanding how to deal with my trauma and not understanding how to have healthy relationships just means that I'm sober but miserable. And that is a recipe for relapse almost every time. The AA community, the NA community have a lot of different terms for this. One of the most popular ones is when we, might call somebody a dry drunk, which just is just implying that, man, that person doesn't have alcohol, but they're still the same old train wreck, emotionally incapable, trauma-ridden person that they've always been, and now they're just alcohol-free and even more miserable. And so somebody might be able to white knuckle their way through that type of recovery program, but it's not going to be successful in terms of helping them rebuild a life that matters. And rebuilding that life that matters is actually what's gonna keep somebody sober. The program of AA, which I think is beautiful, especially from a not being somebody that's identified alcoholic and being able to read some of that literature and really examine it. I've read some really beautiful things, and it has some things to say about this, that fear can keep you sober temporarily. Fear of going to jail, fear of losing my family might keep me sober temporarily, but it will only keep me sober temporarily. What ultimately keeps me sober long term is creating a new way to live, creating a new way to handle all of life's problems and live life on life's terms. And building that type of recovery is what creates the deep, lasting kind of holistic change that I think not only addict and alcoholics are hoping for their own lives, but I think families are hoping for their lives. This is an important piece because we call addiction a family disease, because this definition that we've been talking about, these characteristic manifestations, don't just impact the individual, they impact the individual and everyone in that individual's family, right? Family here can mean lots of different things. It doesn't have to be blood relatives. This idea of fictive kin and us choosing our family is really important. And so we understand addiction having all of these problems with the individual, but we also understand addiction is creating all of these problems for the family, which means that it's not just the addict or alcoholic's responsibility to create change and create recovery. It's their responsibility to create change and create recovery for themselves, but it's the family's responsibility to create family recovery. And they have responsibility and agency to do some of these same things that we're fixing to talk about in terms of a program of recovery on their own, so that the family can heal and that the family can get help. Let's take a look at this kind of characteristic manifestation matrix that I have used for a number of years and kind of like to go off of. When we think about these characteristic manifestations, for me, it's very helpful to break those up into 4 categories. What I want to do is I want to understand them in terms of what has addiction done to create problems for my physical health, what has addiction done to create problems for my psychological health, which is my emotional and my cognitive health, what has addiction done to create problems for my spiritual health, and what has addiction done to create problems for my social health. And on a little bit kind of zoomed out picture, we look at this from a family perspective as well. What has my loved one's addiction done to my physical health? There are countless mothers, countless fathers, husbands, and wives that I've talked to who, because of chronic stress, of dealing with addiction in their family, have their own physical health issues that need to be attended to. They've got their own wellness issues that have been ignored that have to be dealt with in recovery. And the same way around the board. What is addiction of my family member done to me emotionally and cognitively? What has it done to me socially? How has it isolated me from my support system? What has it done to my own spirituality and my own sense of hope, right? And so we begin to see, when we look at these characteristic manifestations, that if we understand that addiction happens in this big, broad, complex way in my life, then my program of recovery also has to happen in this big, complex way in my life. This addiction doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not as simple as just putting psychoactive chemicals in my body and then removing them. If it was that simple, if it was as simple as just getting the chemicals out of my body, then all we would do is need to send people to detox for 5 to 7 to 10 days. They would be great, and we would come out on top of the game. And so I don't want to diminish the need for those things. Like, there is an actual chemical dependency in which my body becomes chemically and physically addicted to a chemical, but it's more complex than that because it leads to all of these other things that require us to deal with them in recovery. So just like addiction doesn't happen in a vacuum, recovery also shouldn't happen in a vacuum. Recovery should be broad enough and complex enough to deal with all of the problems created by addiction. And so I've added to the matrix, the characteristic manifestation matrix. This is going to look a little like overwhelming, but we'll walk through it really slowly. So I've added this to think about what does a recovery matrix look like, right? And a recovery matrix is the same categories, but we begin to see how my program of recovery builds in complexity to blanket my life in a way that creates new wellness and creates lasting change in all these different areas. And so if we take them one at a time and we take the physical section, if I'm thinking about what has addiction done to create physical health problems in my life, or what has my family member's addiction done to create physical health problems in my own life, I need to understand that my program of recovery has to address all of those things. My program of recovery has to address my own hygiene. Am I taking care of myself? Am I engaging in things like showering regularly and taking care of my dental care? Making sure that I wash my clothes and all of these things that when we're active in our addiction, oftentimes we ignore. But we also might ignore these if we have a family member that's active or in our addiction. We're so concerned with taking care of them that we don't take care of ourselves. How is my sleep in this category? Am I taking care of myself in terms of having a good sleep schedule, getting enough sleep, but not too much sleep? So I'm, staying balanced there. What does my nutrition look like? Does my program of recovery have things to tell me about the diet that I'm putting into my body? And I don't want to be one of those people that is over the top. I don't think you've got to, be all organic or all these things. You can be. I'm not knocking that. I'm certainly not against donuts or the periodic McDonald's, but we know that I shouldn't have donuts for breakfast, McDonald's for lunch, pizza for dinner, and Taco Bell for second dinner. Like that's not healthy for me physically, and it's not fueling my body for change, and it's certainly not fueling my body in a way that's going to help me recover from some of the physical deficits that addiction has caused me, or that my family members' addiction has caused me. So as we go around after physical, we want to look at the psychological or the emotional section of this. In what ways have I engaged in cognitive distortions when I'm active in my addiction? Not only that, but in what ways have I engaged in cognitive distortion because of my loved ones' active addiction? Am I caught up in black or white thinking? Am I caught up in how I catastrophize life? Or am I caught up in my own codependent cycles of thinking? And how has my brain health been impacted by all of these things? Have I done a good job taking care of myself and learning new skills and helping my brain create reconnections? And am I dealing with my trauma effectively as a part of my program of recovery? If I'm a recovering addict, am I addressing the traumatic things that happened to me before I began using drugs or alcohol that may have led to those problems? Or sometimes the actual drug and alcohol use creates traumas in my life, right? And so, we move on from there, from thinking about the social section. What does my support system look like? In my program of recovery, do I have enough people that are on my change team? Am I engaged in things like 12-step programs of recovery? Or if I'm a family member of an addict or an alcoholic, am I engaged in a program like Al-Anon or Finding Hope or Parents Helping Parents, where I'm getting support from people who have been there? Am I engaged in other pro-social activities like faith communities and organizations where I'm able to volunteer and give back? And what role does that social health and wellness play in helping me recover from my addiction or helping me recover as a family from my family member's addiction. Other things in the social category, the F stands for family. What ways are we engaging in healthy family activity together? And when I say healthy, I mean, that balance of, not being enmeshed, but not being detached, and finding these healthy ways to interact. Am I holding down a job? How has my addiction or my loved one's addiction impacted my employment? Have I had to call in sick a lot because I've had to stay home and take care of somebody? Or have I lost my job because I'm too hungover to go to work multiple days in a row? How do I build a program of recovery that engages healthy employment, engages healthy social interaction and support, and engages my family? And then we move on to the spiritual section, which I think we can't sell the spiritual section short, because it certainly includes your religious systems of belief and the things that you find important in that area, but it's also much broader than that. So I've included things in this section like my hope. Hope is a spiritual principle. How have I lost hope while I've been active in addiction? How have I began to lose hope for my family member as they've struggled with sobriety or struggled with staying healthy, right? And what strategies does my program of recovery offer me to keep me hopeful, to keep me looking at principles like gratitude on an ongoing basis, right? Another part of this spiritual section is, how do I identify with myself? Do I view myself as somebody that's worth recovery? Do I view my family member as somebody that's worth recovery and worth help? And how do these issues of self-worth and self-identity play a role in my own spiritual health and wellness, right? And then the faith here, the F here would typically stand for faith as a piece of this, right? Now, as we look over this is absolutely not a comprehensive or exhaustive list. This is just an example, right, of how do I look at this? Even you can begin to see, I've got this physical section, I've got hygiene, sleep, nutrition. Maybe also I've got exercise, and I've got movement, and I've got stretching, and I've got all of these different things. And as we add pieces to the puzzle all the way around, this program of recovery begins to build and build and build. And in a way that matches the complexity of addiction, it overlays that with a complex, robust program of recovery that will target all of these things that have become unhealthy and unwell, and help me rebuild them in ways that might matter, right? I want to click over just to make sure that there hasn't been any comments on Facebook, because I can't actually see the thread. So give me just 10 seconds here to move some things around. Okay. So if you've got comments, if you've got questions, please ask them. I would be more than willing to go into more detail about any of these. So comment in the Facebook thread if you'd like. Shoot a text to the text line in the title of the video if you want an anonymous way to communicate. We've got a couple more minutes, so I actually want to wrap up with what I feel like are some really important foundational principles of recovery. And I don't want to skip past either. I can do all this real fast. When we look at recovery, we need to understand that recovery is a continuum, with regression on one side and recovery on the other side. Now, chemical relapse might happen at any point or at any spot on this spectrum, but understanding that recovery is on this continuum helps me understand that I'm either moving towards health and wellness and working a program of recovery, and if I'm not, I'm starting to move towards regression. And the longer I move towards regression, the easier it's going to be, the more likely it's going to be that I experience that actual chemical relapse. What I love about this is not having this reductionist view of recovery where it's just about chemical use, but understanding that I've got this complex program of recovery actually can help me understand that even if I have way over here on this spectrum, if I'm really moving towards that recovery and I've got some sort of chemical relapse, that I haven't failed, right? Oftentimes, people that are working in programs of recovery, they have this singular chemical relapse. And if they think of it as a failure, my recovery's gone, I've lost all of my recovery work, they're more apt to stay stuck in shame. They're more apt to stay stuck in self-pity, and they're more apt to engage in other self-destructive behaviors and allow that singular chemical relapse to become continuous, ongoing chemical use again. And that's not the goal, right? The goal is moving towards recovery, and even having a singular chemical relapse and then understanding, hey, I can immediately bounce back towards working my program of recovery, and I don't have to let this singular chemical relapse burn everything to the ground. Now, that doesn't mean that that singular chemical relapse is going to be consequence free. There's still going to be consequences for that. You still might get kicked out of sober living for that. If you have a family drug court case, you still might be sanctioned for that, or not get your kids back on time for something like that. But it doesn't have to mean that recovery is a total loss. You can bounce back and you can stay on track even after that. I think that's good there. So let's talk about these foundational principles of recovery really quick. And I'll just kind of run through them. These are the 4 things that I think create really great foundations for a program of recovery for an individual who's looking to recover from chemical use, or for a family who's looking to build family recovery together. The first things of these is radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is just this idea that we stop fighting against the reality. We lose our delusion. We figure out how to accept what's happening to myself, what's happening to my family member, because without that acceptance, we're not going to be able to create any change, right? The program of AA has a beautiful page. It might be one of the most quoted, read and quoted pages in the rooms of AA. Certainly that I hear the most often, which just says, acceptance is the answer to all my problems. When I'm disturbed, it's because I find some fact of my own life unacceptable to me, and I can't find any serenity until I accept that thing for exactly the way it's supposed to be. When I accept life on life's terms, then I can be happy. It's this idea that I don't have control. And when I accept that I don't have control, I become healthier and I lay a really healthy foundation. The second principle is rigorous honesty. The program of AA also has a lot to say about rigorous honesty. Rigorous honesty is absolute honesty in all of my affairs, and it's perhaps one of the scariest principles to live by I've ever heard. One of the funny stories that I remember, even from this year in treatment, is we had 2 clients who acted like twin sisters, even though they weren't twin sisters. And we were talking about honesty, and at the exact same time, they both went, rigorous honesty. And what it reminded me of is the 2 twins in the hallway of The Shining who were like holding hands. Rigorous honesty. But I laugh because rigorous honesty is actually that scary of a principle to live by. It's when I'm willing to be honest with myself. It's when I'm willing to be honest with my loved ones and with my community across the board. Nothing is held back. Not that I'm being like tactless and I'm using it like as a scapegoat to be rude or mean to people. It's about me. It's about what I'm experiencing. It's about being honest with my own character defects and with the problems that I'm having, so that I can heal and so that I can get better. The program of AA actually says on page 58 that rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. And so this honesty with self and with others and with life is a basic foundational principle of recovery. The third one is a principle that I like to call extreme ownership. Extreme ownership is just the mentality that if I'm not the problem, then there isn't a solution. It's understanding that I've got to own what's been happening in my own life and understand that the problem is me and I can change. This is hard because it's also good for family members who have loved ones who are struggling with chemical use. It's a really hard place to be when you're watching your son or daughter, or you're watching your spouse continue and tell yourself, man, I'm the problem. It's got to be me. And this isn't some sort of like martyrdom syndrome, just saying, I can't control everyone else in my life. I can only control me and my responses and my attitudes. So the problem has to lie within me, because that's the only place that I have the solution. Certainly their chemical use is a problem, but it's their problem, not mine, right? And so having this extreme ownership mentality can help us understand that. This last principle is complete willingness. There's a big difference between wanting to change and being willing to change. There are lots of people who want to change their entire life who never engage in being willing to change. And so being willing to take suggestions, being willing to take action is what is going to make a difference. It's also helpful to think about, what are you not willing to do to get better? In terms of thinking through how this functions in families, maybe I'm not willing to set that boundary with that loved person, with that loved one. If I'm not willing to set the boundary, then I'm not going to change, right? Maybe, I talk with my own clients about their willingness to go to sober living. If you're not willing to go to sober living, you're not that committed to recovery, because at some point you've got to be willing to do anything, fill in that blank, to get well, to get better. Without that kind of willingness, we're going to sell recovery short. We're going to sell ourselves short. So we emphasize willingness as being indispensable to a program of recovery. So all of those things, I think, can help people who are active in their addiction, but I also think they're really helpful for families, because they help us understand, how and what I know about addiction and how I understand addiction is actually going to translate to how I think and feel about recovery for my loved one and for me as a family member, and helping me have a great understanding of what recovery looks like in terms of this complexity and this robust net that kind of should blanket my entire life. Helps me create programs of recovery that are going to allow me to change deeply, allow my family to change deeply, so that change lasts. That's the goal. We don't want recovery to be something that somebody, kind of floats in and out of. We want recovery to be this integrated way in which they live, where they pursue health and wellness physically and emotionally and socially and spiritually over the course of their life. So hopefully you guys find all that information helpful. I think about these things on a daily basis when I'm working with my clients. I'm constantly bringing them back to thinking about, hey, where is this at on that matrix? What life category is this in, and what action are you willing to take to start getting healthy in that area? So if you've got comments and questions, go ahead and throw those in there. Try to do the best I can, even after the video closes and stuff, to come back in and answer those if you have them. I really appreciate you guys joining me tonight. Hopefully it was okay just listening to me gab the whole time, but I really have been passionate about these things for a couple months now, and really wanted an opportunity to share them with everyone. So thanks for joining us. We're going to be back here 2 weeks from tonight with a good buddy of mine and a person in long-term recovery who works admissions for a treatment center, who's going to have a lot of great information to share with us. So make sure you catch us then. And until then, check out our Facebook page and our website for all the other things that Parents Helping Parents might be up to, and all the other wonderful speakers and meetings and support that is happening week to week. So everyone enjoy what for now in Oklahoma City is beautiful weather, and we will catch you in a few weeks.